This is Tonight, in association with Al Rastamani International Exchange.
Education Now and the Parthenon Group is a management consultancy that serves as an advisor to the education sector globally and has done for 20 years. Khemka is a partner and head of emerging markets practice. Joins us now on the phone. Karen, thanks for talking to us at Dubai Eye today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Let's start with, first of all, why you're in town. It's the Building Future Education MENA Exhibition and Conference. That's in partnership with the Abu Dhabi Education Council, ADEC. It's in Abu Dhabi tomorrow. And you've just released a new report, haven't you? A GCC Insight report that's surveyed a number of schools, 1,100 schools and universities in the GCC. Tell us, first of all, a little bit more about what the report covers and how you've collated the information.
Absolutely. So the report focuses on investment or investment opportunities for private equity or other private investors specifically in private schools and universities or colleges in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So we're not trying to cover all of the GCC here. We picked Saudi because it is, clearly the biggest market in the GCC, the scale of it. And we picked the UAE, well, that's where the conference is being held, and clearly, in terms of international attention, it is a market that gets a disproportionate amount of attention in the GCC. So we focused on those two markets.
What have you found in the report? What struck you most?
Well, here are some quick facts that you might find interesting. So first off, let's start with the school sector in the UAE. Just as a quick fact, and again, the way we've gathered the data is by it's the old-fashioned way. We've just surveyed every private school in Saudi Arabia, every private school in the United Arab Emirates, and we've just tallied everything up. So there's not a lot of estimation or a lot of very smart math happening here. It's pretty boring stuff, but I think it gives a really interesting result. So, for example, the total turnover of the private school sector in the United Arab Emirates is $1.9 billion and growing. To put that in perspective, the total Chinese private school sector turnover is $1.7 billion. Now, there's a reason for this, which is in China, it's very hard to get a license to open a private school to enroll Chinese nationals. So there's a regulatory reason for why the market isn't that favorable, but it gives you a sense of scale. I mean, the UAE international and private school market is bigger than Saudi Arabia. It is bigger than China. It is bigger than most markets around the world, and it does continue to grow. So if we, for example, look at schools in the United Arab Emirates, if we look at schools in the UAE charging over $10,000 a year, from between 2008 and 2011, enrollments have grown from around 31,500 to about 41,000. So the growth has persisted despite the slowdown, despite the downturn. And there's a whole lot of opportunity in the sector.
Education's always an almost protected sector by default, isn't it? And growth's expected to continue at something like 10% here in the UAE. I mean, those figures there are startling, the China comparison. I guess it means that in the UAE, and also this extends to Saudi, there's an investment opportunity here, isn't there?
There absolutely is. And, in terms of the scale of the opportunity, education is typically the second or third biggest component of any economy. But very few people think of education as an industry or an investment opportunity. But consider this. I mean, if you look at colleges or schools, as a business, they have 5 attributes that are very rarely found together in one business. And so one is long-term revenue visibility. In a college, you would have revenue visibility for 3 to 4 years, depending on the course. In a school, for locals, you could have revenue visibility of 6 to 8 years. You have high barriers to entry, right? You need land, you need regulatory permission, you need capital. So it's not that anyone can jump into the field. You have prices that grow faster than inflation, and any parent of a child in a private school will tell you that that is the case. In the case of colleges, private college prices tend to rise in line with white-collar salaries, while your cost base grows with general inflation. And then you have negative working capital. You pay at the beginning of the term or the beginning of the year. And depending on which course type you offer in higher education, and depending on where you open a school, you can have more demand than supply. And remember, supply is not infinitely scalable in education. So it's not like if there's a particular demand for, a particular model of Nike shoes, they can just crank more out of the factory. If you want to expand your school or if you want to expand your university, it takes time because you will be looking for land, you'll be pouring concrete, you'll be putting up a building. So these 5 attributes of long-term revenue visibility, high barriers to entry, prices rising faster than inflation, negative working capital, and greater demand and supply make education or higher education and schools quite interesting businesses.
It's something that UAE's done much to try to foster, I guess. We've got the Knowledge Village area just in next to Media City and also Academic City. So it's something the UAE's looking at very seriously. But it's really not a case of build it and they will come, is it? I mean, what's missing just now? What segments present opportunity and what are the challenges that have to be overcome?
So you actually mentioned the key word, which is segmentation. Segmentation is really important. So let's take the UAE private higher education sector. Now, overall, the private sector enrollments in the UAE higher education sector are growing at about 7% a year, which is good. That's not bad. But there are thousands and thousands of empty seats. Now, if we then segment the market, right, and if we segment the private higher education sector between Western institutions, so a Middlesex, a Heriot-Watts, or even a Canadian University of Dubai, which is not strictly related to any Western institution. So amongst Western institutions, that enrollment growth rate jumps from 7% to 18%. And in fact, amongst non-Western, so a Khalifa University, a Manipal, an IMT Ghaziabad, over there the growth rates are 6%. So if you just segment the market, suddenly you end up with one market that has 18% enrollment growth, and by the way, has only enough seats for another year and a half of growth. So suddenly you're saying, well, hey, that looks like a good market to invest in. So as always, the devil's in the details. You need to sift through this a bit. You need to have a disciplined approach to segmentation. And, it's not something where you should treat education as a business. Education is actually many, many, many businesses, and you need to understand exactly which business you're trying to enter and why.
The UAE is a pretty unique population, is it? And it's a hard thing to... There's a question here that overhangs this. I've lost count of the number of nationalities living in Dubai. The thing is, we all need to educate our kids. We're all different. We all expect different things. But the question is, how do you plan for this cosmopolitan, but it's yet disparate population?
So that is a great question. And both in schools and higher education, this has implications. So in higher education, the public institutions, Azayed University, for example, those will cater mostly to Emiratis. And then when you look at the private institutions, you will then think about, well, what about the South Asians? What about the other Arabs? And what about Western expatriates? And in higher education, there are a few Western expatriates in the UAE. So for higher education, typically a Brit or an Australian will tend to go home at that stage in their education career. So what we're really talking about for higher ed is the public sector largely addressing demand for Emiratis and the private sector addressing demand for other Arab nationalities and South Asians. In schools, it's a little bit different. In schools, the school sector, most of the value is actually driven by relatively expensive international schools for Western expatriates. And many of them come on a company package where the school fees are partially or wholly picked up by the company, which makes these parents relatively less price sensitive. And that's one of the reasons why we have this extraordinary scale of the school sector in the UAE. The UAE has more expatriates than India and China combined, well, Western expatriates in particular. So that's what creates this extraordinary scale in the school sector. And then schools will cater for Western expatriates, South Asian expatriates, other Arabs, and again, Emiratis will tend to enroll in the public schools. That said, here's an interesting fact. The UAE is one of the few countries in the world where enrollment in the public school sector is declining despite the fact that the local population is increasing and there's growing affluence. So, in China, the fact that enrollment in schools is decreasing is no surprise. You've got the one-child policy. In the UAE, it's almost unique in having a declining public school enrollment despite demographics going in a positive direction and income going in a positive direction. And that is, by the way, that is a comment on what parents are choosing. for their children, and they're saying that, and they're voting with their feet, and they're saying that I'd rather put my child in a private school.
This is Tonight, brought to you by Eros Group, in association with TCL. LED TVs, now at the price of an LCD TV, only on Dubai Eye 103.8. We mean business.